Little Red Riding Hood. Little Red Riding Hood is often remembered as a tale about listening to your parents and avoiding strangers. But its original version wasn't a warning, it was a horror story. In older versions, there is no heroic huntsman. The wolf devours the grandmother, disguises himself, and tricks the girl into eating her grandmother's flesh and drinking her blood. Then, once she's disoriented and vulnerable, he eats her too. There's no happy ending, only silence. The tale traces back to 17th century France and Italy, where versions like Charles Perrault's emphasized obedience and chastity. But earlier oral versions were even more brutal, some with no wolf at all, just a man who commits unspeakable acts. Different cultures have variations, some end with the girl escaping on her own, others with the wolf inviting her to strip and burn her clothes. Each one centers on the same primal fear. What happens when a young girl is left unprotected? Hansel and Gretel. Most people remember the trail of breadcrumbs, the candy-covered house, and two clever children. But the real story starts with something far darker. Famine. Their parents, not a stepmother, deliberately abandon them in the woods. The witch who finds them doesn't just want to feed them. She wants to fatten Hansel like livestock and eat him. Gretel survives by pushing the witch into the oven, a brutal end to a brutal threat. This wasn't a tale about sweets. It was about desperation, starvation, and the terrifying things people do to survive. The tale appeared in the Brothers Grimm's 1812 collection, but its roots are older, tied to the Great Famine of 1315-1317 in Europe, when stories of cannibalism and abandonment were widespread. In some lesser-known versions, the children are nearly killed by other forest dwellers or never return at all. The candy house wasn't a dream, it was bait. Cinderella. Forget pumpkins and fairy godmothers. The original Cinderella, or Aschenputtel, was soaked in blood. When the prince comes looking with the glass slipper, the stepsisters mutilate themselves to fit it. One cuts off her toe, the other slices off her heel. The birds in the story sing out the truth. And at the wedding, those same birds peck out the sister's eyes. There is no sparkle, no transformation, only punishment. The story was a violent fable about envy, social ambition, and the price of deceit. Versions of Cinderella go back over 1,000 years. One of the earliest known is a Chinese version from 860 AD. The Grimm brothers' take is far more violent than the French version by Charles Perrault, which introduced the pumpkin and the fairy godmother. In other cultures, Cinderella wins her prince through trials of endurance and cleverness, not beauty. But the lesson stays consistent. Rise above, and someone will suffer for it. Snow White. In the earliest versions, Snow White wasn't targeted by a jealous stepmother, but by her own biological mother. Driven by vanity, she demands Snow White's lungs and liver to eat. When the girl is poisoned, the prince doesn't revive her with a kiss. He takes her corpse, enchanted by her beauty, and she wakes only when the piece of poisoned apple dislodges. It's not a love story. It's a tale of female rivalry, narcissism, and how young women were treated as objects even in death. The Grimm brothers softened this story over time. In their 1812 edition, the mother was biological. Only in later versions did they replace her with a stepmother, a way to preserve the maternal image. In some adaptations, Snow White never wakes. The coffin becomes a symbol of purity preserved forever, a twisted reward for silence and stillness. Sleeping Beauty. The popular version ends with a kiss, but the early version, told by Giambattista Basile, doesn't involve love at all. A king finds Sleeping Beauty unconscious and defenseless and rapes her. She remains asleep through pregnancy and childbirth. Only when one of her children sucks the cursed splinter from her finger does she wake. There's no magic here, only a loss of agency. The story becomes a dark metaphor for entitlement, violation, and forced motherhood. This version, titled Sun, Moon, and Talia, appeared in 1634. It wasn't a fairy tale, it was a reflection of the power dynamics between royalty and women. Later versions by Perrault and the Grimms removed the assault, replacing it with a kiss. But the themes of silence and control remained. In other tellings, the Sleeping Beauty isn't passive. She fights her way out of the curse, but that version didn't endure. The silence did. The Little Mermaid. Hans Christian Andersen's mermaid doesn't get the prince. Instead, she makes a painful deal. Every step she takes on land feels like knives through her feet. She stays silent, watches the prince fall in love with someone else. She's given a dagger to kill him and save herself, but she refuses and dissolves into sea foam. It's not a story about happily ever after. It's a tragedy about unrequited love, sacrifice, and disappearing without a voice. Andersen's 1837 version was heavily influenced by his own feelings of unreturned affection. The mermaid's silence and pain were personal. This wasn't a moral tale, it was emotional autobiography. In earlier sea people legends, mermaids were monstrous or divine. Andersen's tale was one of the first to humanize them, but it came at the cost of their agency. Rapunzel. You think of the tower, the long hair, but in the original story, Rapunzel's secret meetings with the prince leave her pregnant. When the witch discovers the truth, she cuts Rapunzel's hair and banishes her to the desert. The prince returns, climbs the hair, and finds the witch instead. He leaps from the tower and is blinded by thorns. There is no magical rescue, only separation, suffering, and shame. This version was a warning about control, sexuality, and consequence. This tale comes from the 17th century Italian story Petronella by Giambattista Basile. The Grimm's version sanitized parts, but not all Rapunzel's pregnancy was subtly hinted at through her growing belly. In some versions, the prince goes mad in the wilderness before they reunite. In others, they never do. The tower isn't just a prison, it's a metaphor for ownership. Rumpelstiltskin. A young girl is forced to spin straw into gold or be executed. Rumpelstiltskin saves her, but demands her firstborn child in return. When the time comes, she begs for a way out. He gives her one chance, guess his name. If she fails, he takes the baby. The story isn't about cleverness, it's about coercion, desperation, and how knowing someone's true name can be the only form of power left. This story dates back to at least the 16th century. The Grimm brothers popularized it in 1812, but versions of name magic and infant bargaining appear in many cultures. In one version, Rumpelstiltskin flies into a rage and tears himself in two when she guesses correctly. In another, he simply vanishes. The ending shifts, but the threat stays the same. Your child isn't truly yours. The Pied Piper of Hamelin. The town of Hamelin hires a piper to rid them of rats. He succeeds, but when they refuse to pay, he plays again. This time, the children follow. He leads them into a mountain, and they vanish forever. There's no mercy, no second chances. The tale likely originated from real tragedies, plagues, deaths, or mass disappearances, but what remains is chilling, a town that broke its promise and paid the price with its future. The earliest record of this tale comes from a stained glass window in Hamelin, dated around 1300. It showed a piper leading children away, no rats involved. That part was added later. In some interpretations, the children were victims of disease or recruited in a failed colonization mission. Whatever the cause, the story turned grief into warning. Always pay your debts. Beauty and the Beast. Today, it's remembered as a romance. But Beauty and the Beast began as a cautionary tale about obedience, captivity, and survival. In the original story, Beauty is not a bold heroine. She's a girl sent to live with a monstrous creature to save her father's life. The Beast showers her with attention and gifts, but she's isolated, alone, and expected to fall in love with her captor. Over time, she consents not out of passion, but obligation. The transformation at the end, Beast to Prince, doesn't erase what came before. The tale suggests that with enough patience and submission, even captivity can become love. It's a fable built on the normalization of coercion, dressed up in the language of fairy tale romance. The story originated in 1740, written by Gabrielle Suzanne de Villeneuve, and later shortened by Jean-Marie Le Prince de Beaumont. The earliest version was much longer, with elaborate explanations to justify the Beast's behavior, a literal curse. In some variants, Beauty is tested through isolation and manipulation until she submits. The idea that love can tame a monster has been retold endlessly, but its roots are far more disturbing.